Hi everyone, I'm Alex with Glass Factory here with Sam from Innovo Management, and today we're going to be talking about the founding process of Innovo and his recent series he started called Whiteboard Wednesdays.
Hi, Alex. Thanks for having me.
Of course. So to get things started, what was the inspiration behind Innovo and what's like the company's purpose?
Sure. Yeah. So we launched Innovo Management in 2014. Crazy to say that. Time really flies. But yeah, the kind of principle of why we started was to put musicians first, and that kind of stemmed from my experiences as an artist. So when I was in my mid to late teens, I made hip hop music in New York, and signed with a small label in Philadelphia, and what now I understand as a single album licensing agreement. And the marketing dollars that were agreed in the contract never came, and I consulted attorneys and just was told I was owed the money, but chasing it would be a multiple year long process, dragged out, and cost me a ton of upfront money. And so at 17 years old, that wasn't a viable option for me. And so I kind of took a step back, realized I was better at the business side, and didn't know exactly what I wanted to get into, but knew that I wanted to create a place that focused on making sure artists didn't experience what I experienced as an artist, because I felt like my creativity was stripped from me on top of everything else. Um, and so I moved to Nashville eventually in 2014 and launched the business with my then roommate, Ian Rodriguez. And yeah, the whole beginning of the business was off the principle of putting musicians first. And that's kind of transitioned along the way to be more encompassing of like, now we have influencers. So, putting art first more than just music.
Yeah, I love that. I feel like that really identifies also with Glass because I started it after working with a bunch of different magazines and being like, I really want to have a place that's for the artists because I've seen so many artists try to get on blogs and things like that. And
Yeah,
there's payola, there's people just doing weird stuff. So I love that you guys are really for the artist and you have that firsthand experience yourself of just how crazy and confusing it can get. I can't imagine
100%.
how it must have been to deal with that at 17 years old. That sounds so overwhelming.
Yeah, it was definitely a lot. But I think this, like, one thing I always try to get younger or more green industry people to understand is this industry is so small. Um, and if you do the right business, it will come back to you in the right ways. If you cut corners and you go for the dollar immediately, it will come back to you in negative ways. So, we're 6 years into this thing, and we're almost seven now. And for us, it's like, the corners that we didn't cut may have created bumpy roads along the way from a financial standpoint, but it allowed us to build the reputation that we've built. So if you trust the process and do right by people, they'll do right by you.
Yeah, trust the process. Solid saying. Once you
Yeah.
had the idea you wanted to follow in mind for Innovo, how did you go about bringing it to life? Did you and Ian like bring the idea to life together and then find a course of action, or did one of you approach each other? How did that go?
Yeah. So kind of a funny story. So we were actually living in the dorm rooms at a university at that time. I had been out of school for quite some time and decided to transfer back in. So I was studying music business and entrepreneurship, and Ian was studying audio engineering technology. Um, and I had kind of told him my experience. I was just on the tail end of dealing with all of like the potential legal implications of it, and he had seen like my creativity taken from me because he knew me a little bit prior and saw that I was still kind of pursuing it a little bit, and so knew that I wanted to create something that put artists first. And so I always describe it as Ian was really the wind in my sails. Like I woke up one morning and there was a CD on my desk, and it was like an artist, and he was like, he's looking for management. I think you should just start managing him and see where it goes. And I'm someone who traditionally before Innovo liked to plan very aggressively before I jumped into things. And I learned from Ian and just from my community that you can spend all your time planning, but by the time you've executed on a plan, it's already too late in a lot of ways with how fast things change and adapt, especially now. So we kind of operate by it's not ready, aim, fire. It's ready, fire, aim. So the second you have an idea, you launch it, and you just keep pivoting and keep tweaking until you get it onto the right tracks rather than spending 2 years planning. And by the time you launch, it's too late. So I jumped into just managing that artist, and over time, became less and less green as I developed my experiences and my knowledge and relationships. And then, yeah, just as time went on, like lily padded to bigger artists when I felt those artists weren't pursuing it as aggressively as I was. And yeah, and it just grew and grew from there.
I love that. A quote I keep in mind too that kind of helps me personally with motivation is, you can plan all you want until God laughs. So I
Mhm.
feel like that is like,
Yeah.
okay, start doing something, because everything can be made out to go perfectly until
Yeah.
one thing happens where it just sets you on another path. So I love.
Totally. And that's not to say like don't study an industry before you step into it. Like I'm looking at some secondary ventures right now and I'm doing my due diligence because it's spaces I've never worked in or understand. Um but there's like an amount of knowledge that you need to step into a space and learn. And then there's an amount of like, okay, I've spent way too much time. I know this industry so well, but now I'm like, I've missed the chance to execute on it. So yeah, I don't want it to be portrayed as like dive in blind, but you definitely have to like take that first step, because that's the hardest step. And if you wait and wait and wait, the risks increase. So you just got to jump in and get your feet wet and build from there.
Yeah, that clarification is definitely important, because you want to be motivated and excited and not like holding yourself back. But at the same time, you definitely have to have your feet in the ground to a certain extent to be able to like
Yeah.
begin executing and knowing how to make decisions like on the spot. You know what I mean?
Yeah, 100%.
So, that being said, you spoke about returning to college. Did you finish college at the second university?
That was actually my third university,
Okay.
and no, I did not. So I graduated high school, not early. I was just young. So I graduated at 17, and I went to school in Florida. My brother was in school in Sarasota, and so I think it was like I wanted to get out of New York so badly, and my brother was there, across, like he was on the west side, and I was on the east. But still wanted to get out that way, and did a semester there at 17, studied marketing, was way too expensive. And I felt like I was kind of living in a country club. Like we had golf carts that could take us to classes, and we had 4 swimming pools on campus with, you know, um, you could drink on campus at any age. And it was just like very laissez-faire. And it felt like it was something that I would want when later was successful, rather than like when I need to be hustling and feel like the bootstrapping energy. Yeah, and it was just a lot. Like my roommate had an Aston Martin, and everyone was like extremely wealthy and like, princes from all these places and crazy stuff. And so I left and I went back to New York, and that's when I really like pursued hip hop from like a more of a career standpoint at 17. And so um yeah, I did that, and I was in community college in New York for a semester. Then I dropped out of that, and that's when all that stuff happened. And then went over to London for a while, came back. My parents had moved to Atlanta during that process, and so I eventually made my way down to Atlanta. And then I was there 2012 to 14, and then transferred back to Belmont, or back to school to Belmont. Double majored in music business and entrepreneurship, and I got to 2 years in at Belmont, so I had 1 year left. And the last time wasn't a choice. I don't want to paint it as like, this like hustle culture entrepreneur, like dropped out of school to pursue his business. I didn't have a choice. I was paying my way through college, and I couldn't afford to stay in Belmont. Were extremely unresponsive to helping an entrepreneur that they were using for their entrepreneurship, you know, categorizations with Princeton Review and all this other stuff. And so I decided it was best for me to not try to push through. And so I left and did pursue my business, but it wasn't, it was the cart before the horse, if that makes sense. I couldn't afford it. So then I decided to do that rather than I decided to do that and then did it.
Following up with the college discussion, once you left because there was like no way to stay, what resources did you use to further your knowledge in management for artists and business, entrepreneurship, etc.? Because it seems like even though you didn't graduate, you still managed to dig your feet even deeper into these topics. And something you talk about a lot on social media, especially as of lately, is how there's a lot of false information out there. So how were you able, excuse me, how were you able to weed through all of the fake info out there and
Yeah.
find genuine knowledge?
Yeah, that's a great question. And we are in the era of misinformation. You're totally right, especially with like the advent of Clubhouse and all of these new apps where it puts people on pedestals without checking their credentials. Um, I, this is going to sound silly, but I learned by doing. I think that as as a people, we tend to overthink and worry too much about like making mistakes and wanting to be perfect, whether it's like this overarching pressure from society or our parents or whatever. You only learn by doing. Like we preach this internally with all of our staff. It's like if someone comes up with an idea, I want them to pursue it, and if we make mistakes, we'll pivot and we'll learn from it, and we discuss as a team like why these things happen, because that's how you grow and learn. And if someone comes up with an idea and I run with it, it doesn't do anyone any justice. So I learned by doing. I made a lot of mistakes, a ton. I still make a ton of mistakes. No one's perfect. But I learn by doing every day. So being willing and open to learn, checking your ego at the door, and networking. I try to network like crazy. I send like 100 DMs a week on Instagram to industry people trying to schedule calls with them. 95% of the time I get egg on my face and they don't reply. And, of course, like I could choose to feel like crap about that and feel like lesser than them when they read it and ignore me. But that's not why I do it. I'm not doing it for ego. I'm doing it to connect with more people and learn from them. And that's also the reason I launched the Whiteboard Wednesdays series, which we'll get into, to provide a place where people could learn without feeling pressured or feeling like they can't ask a question, or the information they're getting is like from one source or wrong or what have you. So for me, I just learned by doing. I networked a lot, and I also picked up some full-time jobs right out of school. So I worked at Sony ATV Music Publishing. And then in the evenings, I worked at Marathon Music Works in the box office, which for anyone watching is like a 2,200 cap venue in Nashville. So I was working during the day, 9 to 5 at Sony, in the evenings at concerts at Marathon, and then weekends and, later nights and earlier mornings for Innovo, trying to launch it further. And then I left Sony and I went to 1RPM, which is a digital distributor. And so I was running the US marketing department there. And then mid 2018, I made the jump from 1RPM and Marathon and went full time for Innovo. But I spent all that time being a sponge of relationships and information and trial by fire. So yeah, I learned by doing, but I also learned by paying attention and checking my ego at the door.
Would you recommend people to seek out like mentorship relationships, or just kind of networking as they find themselves around?
Yeah, I think a bit of both. I definitely had mentors when I was coming up. Matt Malcolm at WME was someone who was a huge resource to me. He is an agent in the country space, and was always interested in potentially exploring getting into management. So he kind of looked at me as like what could have been, so to speak.
Yeah.
And so I lent on him a ton when I was launching, and he actually got me a job at William Morris. But I was at Sony at the time, and I had just gotten an offer from 1RPM when WME offered me a job. So I didn't take it, um, but Matt Malcolm was a huge resource to me coming up, and I try to be that for as many people as I can. Um, so I think mentors are great to have in the industry. I think you just have to determine like who's the best fit for you, and don't get you someone who's just a yes man, or a yes woman. Like you need people who are gonna like check your ideas, challenge you to be better, um, and do all that. I think that's so important in this industry where like you have one or two successes and everyone starts like following your bandwagon kind of thing, and it's like that's not how we grow. You need to challenge each other all the time. Doesn't matter if someone's like the concierge for success or that industry or that knowledge point, like challenge it, because everything changes on a daily basis. Like we've seen that with TikTok during COVID, like
Yeah.
flip the music marketing industry upside down. So
Totally. Um, So before we dive into your Whiteboard Wednesday series, I would love to ask you what intimidated you most with starting your career? What motivated you, made you feel really confident that like this is the right thing to do when you were making that transition out of
Yeah,
school into the real world?
sure. I don't want to paint this like perfect picture. I always, and we've talked about this, I always try to make my social media less of this like perfect thing and more of like inclusive of my struggles and stuff that people might sometimes hide from social media. Um, and so for me, like back then and definitely still now, I deal with imposter syndrome on a daily basis, just like everyone else. Like, yeah, we have a business that's running and has employees and is doing well, but every day I wake up in the morning and have the same thoughts that everyone else does about like, did we do this right? Are we doing this right? Are we doing right by artists? Are we not doing right by artists? Am I empowering my team? Am I not? You know, every day I have those thoughts and I have my stressors and everything else. So I don't want to paint this like perfect picture by any means. But I think for me, like, I don't know that there was like a specific point where I was like, I'm in the right space at the right time. Like I'm doing the right thing now. I think for me, I just was very adamant about being headstrong and refusing to like listen to these outside people because I got a lot of people like especially at Belmont who would tell me like you're just going to pick this up and put this down in 2 weeks or like you're going to do this and then stop it at the end of college. And a lot of people doubted me because I come from a lower middle class family. I didn't have investment. Like I did this from what was in my pocket at the time and with fairly limited knowledge. And so for me, it was just a matter of like being headstrong and believing in myself and leaning on the people around me who were huge support systems for me. And now that's transitioned to leaning on my team. Like we are so blessed to have staff that believe in what we do every day and fight for it. And we wouldn't be able to grow without that. Like me as a one-man army doesn't do anything for anyone. So the team that we have really are like the boots on the ground that challenge this preconceived notion in the music industry that anyone who's not an artist is trying to do wrong by artists. So yeah, without the team, we'd be nowhere. So that's important to note. But for me, yeah, it was just a matter of like, by the time that I had left 1RPM, I knew like it's now or never. And now, like, I'm at the point where like, even if it wasn't now or never, I'm probably unhireable in a lot of ways because like, seriously, we always say like, as an entrepreneur, you get to a point where you're like unhireable, where people would be silly to invest in me working for their company because I'm an entrepreneur by brain. If Innovo failed tomorrow, chances are I would start something else, whether it be in 6 months or 8 months or so. If someone hires me, I'm probably a short-term fix. Consultancy, sure, but that is kind of like a thing that was always scary as we grew. It was like, as I dive further and further into this, I become more and more unhireable.
Yeah, I totally relate to that. I think there's also kind of a mindset that kicks in because I think that the unhireable syndrome-ish kind of mentality you're talking about is really underspoken about because like it's more of like a confidence thing instead of like comfortability. You know what I mean? Because I think that a
Yeah,
lot of people probably just assume like, oh, this person's just gotten comfortable being the boss, but it's like, no, you're confident that you know how to do it and that you will have an idea that succeeds. And I think that's something that really sets like more prominent entrepreneurs apart from other people because like it's not like the business idea is solid, but it's them that's like a great leader and things like that that's going to drive the force and know that like tomorrow you could start another project and keep going with
yeah,
it.
100%. No, I think it's like you have to be so headstrong and you have to have an ultimate belief in yourself because, I'm at the point now where I have people that believe in me. But when I started this, there weren't that many people who believed in me. I didn't have a proof of concept and I didn't have funding. Um, so at that point, it was like, and for anyone who's listening, who's thinking about starting a business, like if you don't believe in yourself, it will never grow. And it can't. You have to believe that every ounce of your being is meant to create this thing, whether it be for personal gains, for external purposes, whatever it may be. If you don't believe that what you're doing is for a certain reason and put your all into it, you won't be able to do it. It won't work. And when I started this business, like my mental health went to crap, but my physical health did too, my personal life, my financial life. Like that's what it took for me, putting on 40 pounds, not sleeping at all, killing my finances, not dating because I had to focus on launching a business, and 2020 for me was really the year where I said like, okay, it's built now. I'm allowed to also build my own life, and focus on financial health and um, personal relationships and losing weight and like picking up hobbies and doing these other things. And um, but I don't say that to like brag. I say that to fully lay it out for anyone in here who's thinking about starting a business. Like so much energy has to go into it if you want it to get somewhere. Um, it's almost undescribable.
What's something that you would say helps you stay like balanced between work and mental health? Because I feel
Yeah,
like it's a really important area of the industry that people are definitely looking for advice, because especially now that things are on this weird pause, but everybody's online, like still able to make things happen if you're like talking with people that are into kind of like the internet sphere.
yeah,
It can be really hard to put down your phone right now. What would
yeah.
you recommend to knowing your limits?
For me, it's like getting outdoors, and also like trying to find hobbies that are outside of the music industry. I think this industry is super like um, swallowing. All your friends are in the industry. Often people date within the industry. A lot of their trips are industry trips. It's really hard sometimes to find that work-life balance. For me, it's soccer. I've been playing since I could walk, growing up in London. And so I play on a team here in Nashville, and I train 6 to 7 days a week with a soccer trainer. And for me, like that's my time. I don't look at my phone. I'm not paying attention to what's going on. I'm fully focused on like myself, my health, bettering myself at the sport and being outdoors. And that's really like my mental health, um, or my sanity cleanse, if you will. Like when it gets rained out, when it's outdoors in the summer, for a couple weeks, like that's where I start to feel like most stressed. So if
Mm.
I could like attach it to anything for me, it's like just being outdoors and finding something that you love. That's separate from this industry. I think that's the most important part.
All right. So to dive into Whiteboard Wednesdays, recently you
Cool.
started an incredible series on Instagram called Whiteboard Wednesdays, where every Wednesday you go live on Instagram and talk to a bunch of your awesome industry buddies. What inspired this series, and what have a couple of your favorite topics been so far that you've covered?
Yeah. So the advent of Whiteboard Wednesdays was really to focus on creating a hub for information that was accurate and from real life industry individuals. I think the issue with what happens with social media and information sharing is often a lot of the people that are sharing this information aren't necessarily the people doing the work and have like real life experience in it. Um, Not to say any names, but there's a lot of like these people who share these like tips and tricks and coaching and stuff, and like they're not managers, like they're not marketers. Like they read about this stuff or they learn about this stuff and then they share it as if it's information that they've gathered and like lived in. And so for me, it's like, my daily life is kind of all over the place in the music industry, between like on the management side, like I've booked tours for my clients that don't have agents. I've been on bigger tours that my clients who have agents are booking as a TM. I've handled like big merchandising orders or publishing deals or what have you, sync relationships. And so for me, I have enough knowledge about most topics to bring on a guest and be able to like Q&A with them and have them be the specialized person in that industry. But I have enough knowledge about each thing to be like, as I call, dangerous, to have like a conversation about it, which I think helps in my Q&As with my guests. So, it's always been super important to me to give back. Growing up, my family had a ton of financial hardships, from multiple evictions to cars being repossessed. I remember living in a pay it back motel that was like a homeless shelter for young children and all this stuff growing up in New York. And so for me, my parents were always super adamant about us spending our time giving back to the community. So in high school, I won an award from President Barack Obama for having a certain amount of hours in community service that was like presented by the mayor of our town. And um, giving back has always been something that was super, something that lived in my heart. And so I felt like I was finally at a position where I could give back in a way that maybe wasn't financial, but instead was like information gaining for people. And so I kind of created this series to be like a Q&A type conversational thing on my Instagram live. Like you said, each week I bring on a guest. Sometimes they're people I've been doing business with for 6 years. Sometimes they're people I met during COVID and have never been on a FaceTime with. Um, and yeah, we talk shop. I have them tell their story. Often these are people on the inside of like are insulated in the music industry. So I want to put them on a pedestal and give them a chance to be spotlighted because I think that's important. So doing that, and then we kind of do a Q&A section. And so I've been doing it for, last night was week 14. We took a break around the holidays. So I think I launched in like October or September of last year. But as of last week, I launched a charitable component to it because we've been getting quite a few active viewers each week, people like clicking the reminder of my countdowns each week. And so I decided to now it was time to add like not a paywall per se, but like a way to contribute. So I was getting all these messages saying like, how can I pay it forward? Like this has been better than school for me, or better like this. I look forward to this as a learning tool to me each week. And so I decided like the way I wanted them to pay it back was not money for me or money for my guests, because if this isn't service, then it defeats the whole purpose of it. And so I wanted to add a charitable component. And so instead of myself choosing the charity and it being my own, not selfish needs, but my own like wants for the world, I wanted it to be an even more interesting angle. And so each week I have my guests select the charity. So like Sundays I'll get, or sorry, Thursdays I'll get the following Wednesday's charity from them, and I'll get a 15-second video from them explaining why. And I'll use that to promote that charity for the following week. And then Wednesday night, after the donations have come in from my live on Venmo and PayPal, I'll make the donation to that charity on my guest's behalf in their name. So I don't want it to come from me. I want it to be like my guest is taking time to be on this thing. And so they're selecting the charity and the donation is going on in their behalf. I'm merely the person that's providing the avenue to do so. So it's been going really well. You know, I have do not disturb on when I do it, so I can't see if people are donating, and I have no idea until after the live if there were any donations. And week one, we did $250 in the 1 hour live. And for the Thirst Project, which is like provides wells and clean water to villages in Africa. And then last night we did 120 for the LA Food Bank. So yeah, it's been really cool and really rewarding, and super excited to see where it goes.
That's awesome. I love the whole
Thank you.
initiative and how complete it is. Touching back a little bit just on the Clubhouse talk, something too I think that's crazy is that like when people are on Clubhouse and like looking for advice from these people, depending on like their knowledge in the industry, like somebody that might have like a bit more experience than the average novice, I guess you could say,
Yeah.
wouldn't all these people who, unless the work is already out, need an NDA?
Yeah. Yeah. There's
No?
definitely a lot of like interesting information being shared on there that may be like crossing those lines. But I
Yeah.
guess because it's not permanent, people kind of get away with like putting it out there and hoping the wrong person doesn't hear it. The main issue I take up with Clubhouse is there's no information vetting or experience vetting. And so what happens is these people who are good at marketing, who are in college, create these clubs in these rooms, and they bring maybe a couple guests on to speak on a topic, and then they share information about a topic that they may not be best equipped to share, and people take their word for they take their word as bond. And then I sit here on mute and I look these people up on LinkedIn, and they're like either interns or students, like, and I'm not knocking that. We all were students, we all were interns, but when I was a student, I wasn't providing a room like my Whiteboard Wednesdays. I waited until I was in a specific platform to share that information. And that's the issues I take up with it, is like, as long as people who are listening are taking these people's information and then going and fact checking it, completely okay. But if you're not fact checking it, that's where this like weird misinformation is being gathered and spread. And that's concerning. It's super concerning.
Yeah, totally agreed. So, what advice would you have to give to smaller businesses and brands that are looking to expand but struggling in finding others to bring onto their teams? Because something that I feel like Innovo is really well reputable for is having very good team morale. Like everybody seems to work well together. I've heard great things from some of the artists that you guys work with, and it just seems like a very full circle, good vibes. So what would you
Yeah.
suggest to people who might be having a harder time, like trusting others, weeding out good seeds from bad seeds in terms of
Yeah.
like who would fit the company, etc?
Yeah. I mean, we're 6 years into this thing, and we have five or six employees now, and we've gone through 50 people in 6 years, 40 people in 6 years. I mean, like tons of folks. So when you're talking about weeding out bad seeds, it's not for us. It wasn't so much that. It was just like we interviewed, we went with our gut, and we made decisions. And then as things have gone on, like people have left, people have both by our side and by their side, and moved on, and now we're like for the first time ever, I feel like we're in a position where like our team is amazing and they're all killers in their own right, and that only happened by trial and error and by like making mistakes earlier, when it was lower risk. Now it's a way bigger risk, right? Because there's a lot more stuff happening with the business. So for us it was just like you just got to push through it, and you got to make sure like you're unafraid to trust your gut, but also like check it often. Like if it's not working with someone, don't string it along, don't drag it along. And on the morale thing, like it's been harder during COVID, but like we're really big on like team bonding and team culture, company culture. And so in 2000, gosh, I guess it's 2019 now. It's crazy. We did a company retreat, and so we went to Gatlinburg, Sevierville, Pigeon Forge area, and we rented a cabin, and we did whitewater rafting and horseback riding and like more corny company bonding stuff, and different things like that. And we did a holiday party and Thanksgiving, Friendsgiving with the team and their significant others. And at company shows, I open a tab, and we all like can drink on it. And so I think like for us, it's important that the team feels like they have a mouthpiece and like a passion for what we do. In terms of like starting early and bringing staff on before you have the finances, for us it was a huge thing about like making sure that people believed in the mission. So our mission has always been putting musicians first, always being that like do right by artists and it'll come back around. And we could have cut corners and been in a way better financial situation, but that's short-term gains for not as strong longevity. So for us, it was like finding the right people who believed in that mission was instrumental to our growth. And oftentimes those people would be more willing to be a part of something when we may not have been able to offer what other people could because of the mission. So
Yeah, as long as that identity lines up, then it's a match.
yeah, 100%.
Awesome. So before you talked a bit about why Whiteboard Wednesdays has been so rewarding to you, but
Yeah.
what would you consider the most rewarding part of all the processes that have gone into Innovo?
Wow.
I know you have a lot of highlights to pick from this year and things like that.
I think it's been like providing a place where my team can like grow their lives from, and myself, of course, but like we have two employees that bought houses during COVID, and people who are like moving into other ventures and doing a bunch of stuff. And so for me, it's like being able to provide that for others is super rewarding. Separate from all the big accomplishments and all this other stuff, like being able to be like a place where people have a career is just mind-boggling to me every day, and insanely humbling. Like during COVID, like we were hiring for a job, and I don't even remember what month that was. Maybe I don't know, but we got like 75 applications in one day, which was alarming because of how many people are displaced and furloughed because of what's going on with COVID. And so that was insane to me, but to be in a position where we were taking, two people out of that pool and providing them career opportunities is just humbling to me, to say the least. So for me, that's been the most rewarding part of the journey, is like creating growth for others.
Yeah, that's amazing. That's especially so important right now with COVID, like especially with how the music industry is hurting. It's incredible that you've been able to expand and provide people like security right now. So that's definitely a very humble response to the question.
Oh, thank you.
Um, so I have two questions left for you. And
Okay.
the first one is, what has been the most noticeable change in like music industry trends throughout the COVID era? Because I feel like there's so much to say about that, but if you could recommend something to pursue for an artist right now, what would it be? Like, on which trend do
Yeah,
you think they should focus on? Because everything
I
just
think,
switched avenues so suddenly.
yeah, totally. I think two things. One, remove the instant gratification from what you're spending on marketing and what you expect out of it. I think there's this huge misconception in the music industry that because you're spending $1,000, $500, $5,000, whatever it is on marketing a song, that you deserve for this song to be at a certain level or certain pedestal. Marketing is exactly what it is. It's marketing. There's all you're doing is putting it in front of people with the hopes that they take a liking to it, right? So I think there's this huge issue with like, oh, I spent this, so I expect this. Like, oh, all I have to do is put 10 grand into promoting this song and I'll have millions of streams and sign to a label in 4 months. And you have to constantly drip funding into your songs. It's a business, just like we did, just like you did as a business owner. You have to constantly be willing to spend money on marketing. It's not a one-time spend and then you jump off. So I think that's the first piece. The actual advice of where I think people should be spending their time, and I don't want this to be the obvious one, but it is TikTok.
Yeah.
Whether it be TikTok influencer marketing, that's a whole nother beast. But as an artist, you should be spending your time building your own TikTok. There is an unlimited potential for growth on that platform right now. It is ceilingless marketing. We have clients who go on there and for the first time they release something that they feel fits their brand but is aligned with TikTok, and they've gained 50,000, 100,000, 150,000 followers, which then has in turn funneled across to Instagram and then to Spotify. And now they've built this whole other avenue of fan funneling and fan migration. And I know so many artists feel that it doesn't align with their brand. It feels corny, yada, yada, yada. I get it. It's Gen Z marketing. If you feel your music can align with Gen Z, find your niche on there. There are so many avenues you can go. It doesn't have to be corny. You just have to find what works for you, be consistent with it, and it will grow if you're good at what you do. And we've seen it be insanely beneficial to artists, both on like brand promos, so a whole nother element of like funding for them, and in marketing their own music and their own persona.
Yeah, there's a huge market for people that are able to get any kind of TikTok following going right now. I feel like it honestly just unlocks doors, which is so crazy
Yeah,
because like, all the drama behind bringing the app to America and things like that.
yeah,
It's TikTok. Like, you could see 300 videos in an hour. The chances of somebody
right.
watching 30 seconds of yours is pretty high. So
Yeah.
I think that that's a great avenue to direct people to as well. To wrap things up, if you could give a younger version of yourself any advice, what would it be and why?
Ooh, skip college altogether and started managing when I was 17. Also, I would add move to LA or New York when I was 18 and then made the jump, or moved to LA when I was 18 and made the jump to Nashville 3 years later. I think like I did that backwards a little bit. And I think a lot of the people who are movers and shakers who are young in the industry right now are in LA or New York. And I think especially for non-country or Christian music. And I think like that's maybe one of my biggest regrets, was like that I didn't build that and then come across. Instead, I built this, and now I'll be going to LA eventually to launch our second office. So yeah, no huge regrets. I think like you have to trust the journey and you have to look back and like be like, yeah, well, that sucked, but I learned my lesson from it, and this is what came of that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think like you enter every day with, humility and gratefulness, and a thought process that you can do anything that you put your heart and mind to, and tackle the day.
Yeah. Thank you so much for joining us today, Sam. It's been such an honor having you, and I hope that everybody finds some useful knowledge from this conversation.
Thanks, Alex. I appreciate it.